Restart Episode 7, A Hard Pill to Swallow. The Emperor Salarius stood firmly with his wife, Empress Elizabeth. He marveled at the young man his son, High Prince Alarion, had become. Standing with Denzel, the regent of knowledge, and Wilshire, the regent of war, he could not be prouder of the man he had become. They had all made a decision to trust the young prince and to make way to seek counsel from Mercurius Luminar. The decision, once spoken, did not linger in uncertainty. It moved the way imperial will always did. Forward, immediate, unquestioned. The emperor turned sharply, authority settling over him like a mantle. "Mirthi Gwandin," he called. The name did not echo twice. The door opened, and his personal servant entered with a bow so precise it bordered on reverence. Mirthi Gwandin was slight of frame and immaculate in dress, every motion practiced to invisibility, the kind of man who existed everywhere the emperor required, and nowhere else. "Your Majesty," Mirthi said softly. "Prepare the imperial carriage," the emperor commanded. "At once. We depart for the reflections of Luminar. All of us." Mirthi's eyes lifted for the briefest instant, surprise flickering and gone, before he bowed again. "It will be done." As the servant withdrew, Prince Alarion frowned slightly. "Father," he said, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. "Access to the reflections takes months. I've petitioned before, twice. Even as Crown Prince, I waited months to get in." The Emperor did not answer immediately. Denzel did. "Allow me to worry about that," the Regent of Knowledge said calmly. "As Regent of Knowledge, I possess privileges few remember exist." He glanced toward the door Mirthi had closed behind him. "And well, when the Emperor calls, there are very few in this realm who find the courage to say no." He motioned the action of having one's neck slit with a knife. Wilshire's lips twitched. Usually those who say no don't get a second chance. The Emperor turned again, this time toward the far side of the study where a young maid had entered. "Send for Calium Brightward." That name carried its own gravity. Minutes later, the door opened once more, and the hero of Valoria stepped inside. Calium Brightward looked precisely as legends insisted he should, tall, broad-shouldered, and effortless in his confidence. His armor was lighter than a knight's, designed for movement rather than spectacle, and worn as though it were simply another layer of skin. He bore the telltale sign of a hero, blue eyes with white specks, and his hair fell loosely around his face, and a faint smile rested there, half charm and half mischief. He bowed. "You called, my Emperor." The Empress's eyes flicked over him, slow and deliberate, before she smiled. "Well," she said pleasantly, "this is disappointing." Calium blinked. "My lady?" "This morning," she continued, "I distinctly recall an 8-pack of abs as you came to our rescue sword in hand." She tilted her head. "I see only your armor now. A tragedy, truly." The room froze. Then Calium coughed, straightened, and glanced down at his armor as though betrayed by it. "I assure you, Your Grace," he said carefully, "my abs are merely obscured." Wilshire outright laughed. Denzel shook his head, amused and carrying a broad smile. Alarion stared at the floor, his ears unmistakably red. "Enough torment," the Emperor said, waving a hand. "Can you ride with us?" Calium bowed again, grinning. "An honor." Outside, the imperial carriage awaited, massive, rune-etched and drawn by beasts bred for endurance rather than speed. The palace gates opened wide as Captain Dareth of the palace guard approached on horseback, armor gleaming, posture rigid with duty. "I will escort," Dareth said simply. The procession moved. As the carriage rolled through the capital, Denzel leaned forward slightly, eyes thoughtful. "Tell me," he said, "what kind of goblins did you face?" Prince Alarion answered without hesitation. "A mix of all kinds, including 3 separate goblin chiefs." Denzel's brows rose. "How many?" "3." The carriage seemed to grow quieter. "I slew them," Alarion continued. "Each led a separate war band." Wilshire let out a slow breath. "3 chiefs," he repeated. "That alone would have broken most border armies." Calium's eyes widened. Then he leaned back and let out a sharp, impressed whistle. "Well then," he said, "remind me never to underestimate royal blood." "They smelled like ash and farts that boiled from a pot of filth," said the prince with a strong emphasis on the word filth. The emperor looked at his son, pride unmistakable in his gaze. While the carriage carried them onward, Denzel continued, "It has been many centuries since goblins have been within our borders." Wilshire spoke next. "In the old days, a goblin general once rode on a great magic wolf. It took many heroes to slay the great beast. This was in the ages of heroes before the great fall of the old kingdoms, and this merry bright." The carriage rocked gently as it crossed from stone streets to the older road, wheels humming against the worn path. The city's walls slid past the windows, familiar stone giving way to older masonry that seemed to remember more than it revealed. Then Denzel shifted, the faintest curve of a smile touching his mouth as he looked across at Calium. "Mary Bright ain't got nothing on me," Denzel said at last, voice dry and certain. "I have outlived kings, corrected heroes, and buried more bad ideas than any battlefield ever could." Calium laughed softly, tipping his head in acknowledgement, while Wilshire remained turned toward the window, watching the capital recede. After a moment, Wilshire spoke without looking back. "I survived one war," he said evenly. "I am not afraid of another." The words landed without flourish, not bravado but history spoken plainly. The emperor's hand rested on the carved arm of his seat, steady and unmoving, while Alarion felt the weight of those voices settle around him. Knowledge, war, legend, and rule, all sharing the same confined space, all moving toward the same reckoning. Denzel spoke again, this time his tone sharpened by curiosity rather than wit. "Mary Bright," he said, turning fully toward Alarion, "tell me about the fight. Not who won, how it felt." Alarion drew a slow breath. "Speed," he said. "That was everything. He moved faster than intent itself. We weren't reacting to his strikes. We were reacting to where he had been." His hands tightened unconsciously. "And he was enjoying it, toying with us, correcting the actions and fighting styles of the Dawn Guard, smiling while we fought like our lives depended on it." Calium's grin faded, replaced by a thoughtful stillness, and even Wilshire turned from the window. "He wasn't testing his limits," Alarion continued. "He was testing ours. Every opening was deliberate. Every mistake we made, he'd already planned for. If he'd wanted us dead, the fight would have ended before it began." Denzel nodded slowly, fingers steepled. "That," he said quietly, "is the mark of someone who understands the full distance between power and restraint, and chooses to stroll along it." The carriage pressed onward, bearing them toward the reflections of Luminar. No one spoke again, But none doubted that the road ahead would demand every part of them, mind, blade, crown, and soul alike. The imperial carriage slowed beneath soaring spires of white stone and sunlit crystal, its wheels whispering to a halt within the inner court of the luminarium of Solanor, the most prestigious school for latent heroes in all the 5 great kingdoms. Banners stirred high above as knights in full imperial regalia stepped forward, armor polished to mirror brilliance, cloaks edged in gold. As the doors opened, they formed ranks at once, blades crossing in salute, before escorting the party through the great gates with measured, ceremonial steps. They had gone no more than a dozen paces when a man in deep azure robes hurried toward them, staff forgotten in his haste. The dean of the luminarium stopped dead the moment he truly saw who stood before him. His eyes widened, breath-catching, and then he shouted, "Oh, by the light, Calium Brightward himself!" The words echoed off marble and crystal alike. The dean bowed so deeply he nearly toppled forward, hands trembling as his gaze darted between Calium, the emperor, the empress, and the rest of the assembled legends. "Your Majesty, your graces, this honor—" He swallowed hard, visibly overwhelmed. "The luminarium is blessed beyond measure today." Denzel stepped calmly to his side, a grounding presence amid the dean's barely contained awe. "Steady," he said quietly. "Legends have a habit of arriving all at once." The dean laughed weakly, then blinked as recognition sharpened further. "Great Regent Denzel," he breathed. Of course you would be here as well." He straightened with visible effort, dignity reclaimed through sheer will. "Please, I will guide you myself." He led them through vaulted corridors awash in natural light, walls carved with the names and deeds of heroes past. As they walked, the dean spoke with reverent pride. The luminarium of Solanor, he explained, had been founded by Mercurius Luminar, the first and greatest of Solanor's heroes. Mercurius had led the final crusade against the Plague King's vast armies. For 7 nights the battle raged, shadow and fire tearing the land apart, until on the 8th dawn, Mercurius struck down the Plague King, shattering his crown and sealing his darkness beneath the world. Upon those purified ruins, Mercurius built the luminarium itself, a beacon to ensure such evil would never rise again. Their path ended before towering doors guarded by knights unlike any others. Their armor was a flawless union of silver and gold, etched with runes that pulsed softly with restrained power. At the dean's nod, the doors opened. Beyond lay a vast chamber, cathedral-like in scale, its ceiling lost in radiant height. At its center stood a raised dais bearing a single relic, the sun-forged blade Orion. Though sheathed, it glowed with steady golden light, as if dawn itself had been bound within the steel. Ancient locks and sigils encircled it, absolute and unyielding, yet the blade's presence pressed outward all the same. Silence fell instinctively. Beyond the dais stood an array of luminous mirrors, tall, flawless surfaces of living light. The dean lowered his voice. Before his passing, Mercurius had infused his vast wisdom and memories into these mirrors. When one asked a question, his likeness appeared, calm, radiant, and wise, offering counsel drawn from boundless knowledge. These were the reflections of Luminar, sought by students, scholars, and even the imperial council. Through them, Mercurius still taught, still watched, still guarded the empire he had saved. As the party took this in, the dean turned to Denzel again, voice careful and deferential. "Of course," he said, We will clear the main hall of the reflections at once. This audience will be entirely private, no interruptions." He hesitated, then gestured subtly toward a sealed corridor veined with soft gold light. "While mirrors of Mercurius exist throughout the school," he continued, "there is one singular reflection, reserved for matters of the highest sensitivity. Its communion is more personal. Someone is presently seeking its counsel." His expression tightened with resolve. "I will have them removed immediately. Mercurius himself would demand no less." The knights in silver and gold stepped aside as the inner sanctum opened further, Orion's glow casting the chamber in perpetual dawn. As the Emperor advanced toward the mirrors, the air itself seemed to still, as though past and present had recognized one another. Behind them, the dean followed in humbled silence, smiling faintly, for the legends etched into stone had at last stepped down to walk once more among the living. The raised voices reached the chamber before the figures did, sharp with outrage and wounded pride. From the veined corridor emerged a richly dressed nobleman, his family close behind him, silk and jewels catching the golden light, as he gestured angrily toward the dean. "This is an insult," the noble shouted, his voice echoing off marble and crystal. "My family has waited weeks, months for this audience. You cannot simply cast us aside because someone else arrives unannounced." He took one more step forward. Then he saw who stood within the sanctum. The Emperor, crowned and radiant beneath Orion's glow, the Empress at his side. Calium brightward, presence heavy with restrained power. Denzel calm and eternal, eyes like a still sea. Legends made flesh, gathered beneath the blade that had ended an age of darkness. The noble's words collapsed into silence. His face went pale, his knees struck the marble, and he fell forward in a clumsy, desperate bow. His family followed instantly, spouse sinking low, children dropping to their knees, heads bowed in instinctive submission. Your Majesty," the noble stammered, forehead pressed to the stone. "Forgive us. We did not know. We would never have spoken so." Before the dean or the knights could respond, the Emperor raised a hand. The chamber froze. He stepped forward, his voice calm, measured, and carrying the full authority of the throne without a hint of cruelty. "Lord," he said evenly, "you have my apology." The noble trembled, scarcely daring to breathe. "What I am about to do here is no slight against you or your family," the Emperor continued. "But this matter concerns national security, and it is of the utmost importance to the Empire. It cannot be delayed." The silence deepened as his words settled over the kneeling family. "I will endeavor to be quick," the Emperor added, his tone honest rather than reassuring. "But I cannot guarantee how long this council will take." Tears shone in the noble's eyes as awe replaced every trace of anger. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "we are honored simply to have stood before you. We will wait, or depart entirely, as you command." The Emperor inclined his head once, a gesture of acknowledgement. "The dean will see you properly accommodated." At a subtle signal, the silver and gold knights stepped forward, guiding the family away with quiet dignity. None of them looked up again. None needed to. When the doors closed, the stillness that followed was profound, thicker than silence, heavy with history and consequence. The dean bowed low, lower than ever before, and stepped aside. Before them, Orion continued to glow like captive dawn, and the reflections of Luminar waited, ready to bear witness as the Empire's living legends prepared to speak of matters that would shape its fate. As the chamber's light subtly shifted, the vast mirror responded, not with sound, but with presence. Its opulent surface, framed in gold filigree and ancient sigils, shimmered like molten dawn, and from that living radiance, a figure began to take shape, as though memory itself were choosing to walk once more. Mercurius Luminar emerged slowly within the mirror's depths, his form resolving from light into clarity. He stood tall and composed, clad in armor of burnished gold so finely wrought it seemed less forged than grown. Every plate engraved with elegant, flowing patterns that echoed sunbursts, laurels, and the language of old victories. The armor did not gleam harshly. Instead, it held a warm, steady glow, as if it remembered the sun under which it had first been worn. His features were youthful yet timeless, strong without severity, calm without softness. Dark, wind-swept hair framed his face, catching the light at its edges, while his eyes shone with a clear, piercing brightness that suggested both vast intellect and unshakable resolve. When he looked outward from the mirror, it was not as a phantom or illusion, but as a man fully aware of who he was and what he had been. Light gathered behind him, forming the suggestion of towering halls and open skies, impressions of battles fought and peace earned. Though he did not yet speak, the air seemed to grow heavier with meaning, as if the room itself leaned inward to listen. This was no mere echo or magical recording. This was Mercurius Luminar, as the world remembered him, hero of the Blight, founder of the Luminarium, bearer of Orion's legacy, standing once more at the threshold between past and present, ready to offer counsel forged in an age when the fate of the world had rested in his hands. The mirror brightened slowly, not in a flash, but in a gathering of presence, as though something ancient had drawn a breath. Its surface settled into a calm, radiant sheen, smooth as polished crystal and warm as dawnlight on stone. Within it, Mercurius Luminar inclined his head with deliberate grace, one hand resting over his heart in a gesture of respect long forgotten by the living world. His armor, forged in an age when legends still walked openly, reflected gold and ivory light, and his eyes carried the weight of centuries unspent. "Greetings, honorable and esteemed guests," he said, his voice resonant yet gentle, carrying neither echo nor distortion, but the texture of memory itself. "What you see is a reflection bound to truth. I am Mercurius Luminar, once of flesh and breath, now of oath, sacrifice, and remembrance." Prince Alarion stepped forward, the scrape of his boots against stone unusually loud in the hushed chamber. His armor bore fresh scars, not yet polished away, and the smell of battle still clung to him. "I return from war," he said, his voice controlled but strained, "from conflict with one who claimed to be Mary Bright." A murmur rippled through those gathered, and instinctively all eyes returned to the mirror. Mercurius's expression changed, not sharply, not violently, but as if an unseen blade had pressed slowly into his soul. The light around him dimmed a fraction, and his eyes, once steady, became distant. Pain and regret moved across his face with the inevitability of a tide. "Hearing that name," he said quietly, each word measured and heavy, "reopens wounds that never truly healed. I carried many burdens in my life, yet I had not yet known the pain of this depth, only with the passing of Taurus Bold, with the death of Tesoro Green, and with the loss of my once great, once unshakably loyal ally, Mary Bright." He paused, and for a moment it seemed as though the mirror itself mourned with him. Slowly Mercurius raised his hand toward the glass. Prince Alarion, he said, his voice firming with resolve, place your hand upon the mirror. Do not shield your mind. Remember what you witnessed, exactly as it was. Let the truth stand uncloaked. Alarion obeyed. The instant his palm touched the surface, the mirror rippled violently, as though struck by a stone hurled from another age. The chamber vanished, replaced by motion and sound. Goblins surged in numbers beyond counting, shrieking and dying beneath disciplined steel and blazing magic. Victory came hard and bloody, but it came. Then the air twisted, reality folding in on itself, and Mary Bright appeared. He moved like a black shadow given flesh. Dawnguard charged him in force, and were tossed aside or played with, their formations collapsing under the sheer precision and brutality of his strikes. Images changed to view the prince and his fight with the laughing elf clad in living shadows. His magic was unmistakable, raw, devastating, and terrifyingly controlled. When he vanished in a flash of unnatural teleportation, the mirror itself seemed to affirm what all had seen. That was Mary Bright. The same face, the same body, the same style, the same power. No doubt. None. That indeed is Mary Bright, said the mirror, eyes sorrowful. The vision shifted, flowing backward into Mercurius's own memories. Mary Bright stood at his side, laughing amid smoke and ruin. Blades rang together, spells intertwined. More than once, Mary Bright dragged Mercurius from the brink of death, and just as often, Mercurius returned the favor. Tesoro Green fought with brilliant resolve, every motion purposeful, every sacrifice chosen. Taurus Bold was a force of will incarnate, roaring defiance at horrors meant to break lesser men. Together, the four of them fought through nightmare and legend alike. Together, they stood against the Plague King and lived. Yet even as triumph shone, sorrow bent Mercurius's reflection. For memory knows its ending even when hope once did not. The scene froze on the four of them standing together, breathing hard, victorious. They were just at the door of a large castle with death all around them. They were proud and happy. Then it shattered. Without warning, without hesitation, Mary Bright stepped forward and drove his blade into Tesoro Green's neck. The sound was wet and final. Blood spilled down Tesoro's armor as disbelief crossed his face, followed by pain, then fading light. Horror rippled through the moment, freezing Mercurius and Taurus alike as the truth struck harder than any blow. It even appeared the Mary Bright's face was shocked for what he had just done. Taurus screamed, a raw animal sound torn from the depths of his chest, and hurled himself into Mary Bright with everything he had. The impact shook the ground. Taurus drove him flying backwards. Taurus then slammed a towering barrier of magic into place, light blazing like a second sun. Mary Bright struck the barrier again and again, shrieking, spittle flying, eyes wild and unfocused. Whatever he was now, sanity had been left far behind. Tesoro, collapsing to one knee, raised a trembling hand to keep the shield holding. His eyes met Taurus', and in that silent exchange lay a lifetime of brotherhood. Golden light poured from Tesoro into Taurus, every remaining fragment of his strength given freely to help hold back Mary Bright. The glow engulfed Taurus as Tesoro Green died, his final breath an offering of hope. Empowered beyond mortal limits, Taurus stood blazing, screaming for Mercurius to run, to finish it, to kill the Plague King while he held Mary Bright back. Grief carved itself into Mercurius's face, but he turned. He ran, casting one final glance over his shoulder to see Mary Bright hammering the shield again and again, each strike shaking the air with terrible force. Mercurius forced his gaze forward. He became motion and fury, carving through creatures in a blur of gold and fire. He slid beneath snapping claws, severed torsos with single strokes, and split abominations from crown to core without breaking stride. Blood, ash, and ichor marked his passage until he reached vast, opulent doors engraved with symbols of ancient dominion. He entered alone. The doors slammed shut behind him like a verdict. Inside, silence reigned, profound and reverent, like a temple abandoned by time itself. Where a throne should have stood, a mirror waited. Its surface was flawless, untouched by dust or age. Within it sat a king clad in terrible armor, regal and monstrous in equal measure, his form preserved beyond decay, beyond years, beyond the natural order of life. Mercurius halted the vision and turned to those watching. The Plague King did not merely rule from a mirror. He lived within it. He did not age. He did not weaken. He outlived the rhythm of life itself. His gaze hardened. From him, I learned what eternity does to even the greatest of men. The vision resumed. The Plague King spoke not with fury nor madness, but with absolute conviction. Once he had been a hero in every sense of the word. He rose in an age of chaos and injustice, standing against tyrants, monsters, and warlords when few dared. He banded heroes together beneath a single cause, uniting fractured peoples and rival kingdoms. He ended wars that had burned for generations. He fought not for glory, but for justice, for order, and for the belief that the world could be made better if guided by a firm and righteous hand. And for a time, he was right. The world prospered under his victories. Each triumph reinforced his certainty. Each enemy defeated without consequence taught him that resistance was folly. Good prevailed so often, so completely, that he began to believe his judgment infallible. Justice became efficiency. Mercy became an indulgence. Compassion became a liability. When difficult choices arose, he chose the path that preserved order at any cost, and justified it as necessary for the greater good. Because he did not age, because death never humbled him, he never surrendered power. He ruled long past the span of wisdom, loving the world not as something living and fragile, but as something to be perfected and controlled. He loved too long, and in doing so, that love became possession. Entire peoples were condemned in the name of peace. Atrocity was reframed as sacrifice. Evil was committed not out of hatred, but out of certainty. When the 10 kingdoms rose to dominance, their power was unmatched and unchecked. Together, they nearly shattered the world. The Plague King stood among the chief architects of that ruin, and yet to the very end, he believed himself righteous. In his mind, the world suffered not because of his sins, but because it resisted the perfection he sought to impose. The mirror dimmed slightly as Mercurius spoke again. I learned something watching him, he said. Evil does not always begin in cruelty. It often begins in victory, in certainty, in the belief that one's own goodness excuses any action taken in its name. He gestured to his own reflected form. That is why I did not bind my soul to this mirror. I did not seek eternal life. I did not seek dominion beyond death. I placed only my thoughts, my memories, and my counsel here, so that I may guide, but never rule, advise, but never command. His voice softened. A soul that lingers too long forgets how to change, and what cannot change will eventually justify anything. The vision shifted once more, revealing Mary Bright captured, suspended as living darkness poured over him. His screams were raw, desperate, unmistakably human. Mercurious's expression tightened. The Plague King did not corrupt him by accident. He dismantled him deliberately. He reached into Mary Bright's soul and excised everything he did not find useful: compassion, honor, mercy, until only power, intellect, and burning passion remained. What survived was obsession, shaped and bound entirely to his will. Mercurius looked back to those watching, the mirror's light steady but restrained. "That," he said quietly, "is why I chose reflection over eternity, guidance over control, memory over immortality. I would not become the thing I once fought beside. I would not allow good intentions, unending and unquestioned, to rot into the most vile of evils." The mirror showed Mary Bright captured, suspended as living darkness poured over him. His screams were raw, desperate, human. The Plague King suffocated, killed everything good within him, Mercurius said, his voice thick with grief. Compassion, honor, mercy. He left only what he desired: power, intellect, passion. What remained was obsession, chained to the Plague King's will. The scene suddenly changed back to the Plague King in a mirror and Mercurius. The Plague King spoke with power and righteous indignation, his voice echoing unnaturally through the throne room. "So you are what stands in the way of everything. You stand there thinking you are so noble and tall." Each word dripped with anger and latent disgust, as though the very act of addressing Mercurius offended him. Mercurius answered with a passion born only within heroes, unafraid to give voice to the truth. "You are a monster who has stripped the world of everything good. My friends," his voice tightened with grief and fury, "you are pure evil, Plague King." The Plague King regarded him with a gaze so cold and absolute it felt like judgment itself, as if a sentence of death had already been passed. Then he began to laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor, warped and hollow, sending a chill through the air. He raised his dark gauntlets, glaring at Mercurius as his reflection loomed within the towering mirror behind him, an evil god encased in glass. Suddenly, black darkness erupted from the mirror, spreading outward and swallowing the throne room as Mercurius struck again and again with Orion, the sun-forged blade. But his blows did nothing. The blackness enveloped everything, clinging to him like thick gel, choking and crushing, flooding his mind with terror so absolute it nearly erased his sense of self. On the brink of annihilation, Mercurius screamed "No," as if from his very core of being, drawing upon the light within his soul and within the blade itself. "You cannot have my soul." The darkness recoiled instantly, snapping back into the mirror, and the Plague King stared in genuine shock. Mercurius stood frozen for a heartbeat, then hurled Orion with every fragment of will he had left. The glowing blade struck the mirror dead center and pierced it, and for an instant, the world held its breath. Then the mirror shattered outward in a catastrophic explosion, as if the force came from the being trapped within. The armored figure inside was torn apart, its body erupting into black ichor as thousands of imprisoned souls screamed at once. Released in a single, deafening wail, shards of glass scythed through the air and rained across the floor, and as they settled, each fragment began to bleed thick, black bile. The foul liquid pooled and spread across the stone, alive with a sickened sheen, the last corrupt essence of the Plague King seeping into the world before finally falling still. When Mercurius finally staggered from the throne room, the Plague King's servants lay scattered and motionless, alive yet hollowed out, their eyes vacant shells. He found Taurus fallen among them, and beside him lay Mary Bright, convulsing, breathing, but utterly gone, as though whatever had once defined him had been burned away. Knowing such a being could never be permitted freedom, Mercurius acted without hesitation. He sealed Mary Bright within a hidden labyrinth crypt of a long-fallen kingdom, a place erased from maps and memory alike. Using a bound magic stone, he reached the crypt and locked it beyond mortal access, weaving wards meant to endure centuries. When the emperor later demanded the location, Mercurius did not withhold it. As the image resolved within the mirror, Prince Alarion cried out, recognition dawning in his voice, the very place the dragon Paraxis had once shown him. Hear me now, Prince Alarion. Listen now to my final words of wisdom. Listen as if your very life depends on it. If Mary Bright now walks free, Mercurius said, the mirror's pale light sharpening the weight of his warning, then he does not walk alone. Someone commands him. This must never be taken lightly. Never underestimate him. He is the most dangerous being alive, save the Plague King himself. Guard against teleportation. Expect devastation. If the Plague King spoke true, then Mary Bright is nearly indestructible, and the world now faces a terror reborn. The mirror dimmed at last, its light fading into nothing, leaving behind a silence that was heavy, reverent, and afraid. Regent Wilshire spoke first, his words driven partly by shock and partly by a desperate attempt to blunt the crushing dread settling over the chamber. With grim, ill-timed humor, he gestured faintly toward the fading mirror. Well, that was all very horrific, and in no way a proper bedtime story. The assembled group turned almost in unison, their gazes passing briefly over the prince before settling on the emperor at the head of the hall. He inclined his head once before speaking, his voice measured and heavy with certainty. Yes, the emperor said. He speaks the truth. His face turned to look directly at the prince as he continued. My son, we face an unseen evil beyond the realm, one that wields powerful instruments of destruction. It is unlikely Mary Bright was the only such tool. Our enemy has chosen not to grant us something tangible to strike at. Instead, he offers us shadows, stories, and horrors drawn from a bygone age. The emperor's eyes hardened, and the chamber seemed to grow colder. Mercurius is correct. We must not lower our guard for even a moment. To do so would be to invite the sudden sting of a dagger in our backs.